And welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul-led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Miller. Thank you for joining me today. My guest for this episode is Dr. Janine Kreft, a clinical psychologist turned mental wellness and energetics mentor who joins me to chat all things healing, mind, body, and soul. Janine has a super interesting journey from being a ballet dancer for 17 years to dealing with various personal health crises and ultimately finding her way into holistic and energy psychology healing approaches. I came across Janine's personal story of a powerful lesson she learned about health and consciousness through her dog Bucky's health journey, and I wanted to invite her to share this story with you. It's an incredible story of how Bucky's physical growth was reflecting Janine's own transformational growth that she hadn't acknowledged. We also touch on so much more, including managing the grief of identity change, getting to the root cause of issues, how issues start at the energy level first and then manifest into form, often as a health challenge, healing from the cellular level, the relationship between stress and illness, symptoms as information, tuning into energy to identify what is true for you and your dog, bringing ourselves into a state of regulation, and so much more. Janine also gives some really helpful pointers on how to distinguish between your own energy and when you might be taking on energy from others or from the collective and what to do about it. If you love the connection between the mind, body, and spirit, you're going to love this episode. Now, before we dive in, just a quick note that this episode is sponsored by Aspirationary, which in full transparency is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to support you in becoming all you aspire to be. I'm really excited to announce that we have released a Spanish language version of our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens, in order to increase menstrual literacy and empower young people to become advocates for their menstrual health. You can learn more about our books on our Instagram page, which is Aspirationary, spelled Aspirationery. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Janine. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. I am beyond thrilled that you're here with me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much. I'm so grateful we connected, and to hear the work you're doing is truly remarkable. I love it.
Oh, ditto, ditto. That's how I feel about your work too. And I mentioned to you on Instagram, but I just love your daily posts of inspiration and affirmation. And I just feel like the little things that we can do in our little corners of the internet and the world to be putting positivity out there and to remind people of who they truly are and the consciousness that they are and how they can be empowered in their own lives. I'm all about it.
I love it. I love it.
But to give the audience a little bit of a background on why I specifically wanted to talk to you, I just wanted to kind of frame that I came across your podcast and how you had talked about your experience with your dog, Bucky, and how he presented a different way for you to look at health and well-being and consciousness and manifestation, like all the things in our relationships between our dogs and ourselves. So we're going to dive into that because I think that will be really helpful for people to hear and give a different perspective on how we're thinking about health and our relationship with our dogs. But I thought it might be helpful to kind of go back a little bit more because I know you've got a super interesting background of having been a dancer and a clinical psychologist and now supporting people with energy work and the links with mental health and physical health. I'm like, I just want to talk about all the things. So
all the things.
all the things.
Tell me all the things.
All the things. So I wondered if you wouldn't mind kind of talking about your journey through that and how that ultimately led you to a sense of awakening to who you are and supporting people and do the same for themselves.
Wow. Yeah. So the nutshell version is I practiced ballet for 17 years, and that was like my identity. And through that, I had some health traumas. That's kind of where I experienced a lot of intensity, if you will, early on. And I got to the point at the end of those 17 years where I had danced professionally and I thought I was going to, move to New York and continue on and la, la, la. But I had the last health trauma was a misdiagnosed appendicitis that basically almost killed me. And so that was very traumatic, back in '04. And I just had a really hard time bouncing back from that. It's like, and so I was just physically done, mentally at capacity. I just couldn't keep going. So I quit, and not in the way I wanted to. I wanted to quit at the height of my career, not at the demise, so to speak. And I just felt incredibly lost. And so that is when I sought therapy. And so I was about 24, 25 years old. And I just fell in love with the process and learning more about myself and all these things. And so then it was kind of like a no-brainer that, oh, you know what? My new passion is therapy. I'm going to become a psychologist. So here we go. You know what I mean? I got it. My new identity is online and everything's healed, right? So got forth to now I'm in my pre-doctoral, postdoctoral era working at the VA. So I was seeing veterans, a lot of intense trauma, trained very traditionally Western model of medicine, clinical psychology, diagnosing, all those things. And I just had a hard time aligning with the traditional evidence-based treatments. And a lot of times I found that even the veterans were saying or just it wasn't working the way they were saying statistically it was supposed to be working. And I was like, something is not right here. This is not, I don't feel like having veterans regurgitate their trauma over and over and over again is really creating healing. And so at that point, that's when I started to look for what else was possible. And I fell into just all these modalities. I have a plethora of trainings and certifications, the constant seeker from access consciousness, neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, emotion code, body code, EFT tapping. Oh my God, you name it. I probably have a certification or done at least a training in it. So that is kind of what awoken me, I would say back in kind of probably 2016 was the kind of beginnings of that. And that's where I was like, okay, now we're touching on something. And then started to step on the gas with more of a holistic and energy psychology approach. And really it wasn't that very, very popular at that time. So I started posting on social media because I'm like, I need to get this information out there. And so this was 2017 when I joined Instagram and started cautiously posting about it. I didn't want to show being too woo or, what I mean? It's still very the buttoned up professional. I was very robotic. It's fine. But that's kind of what led me to, exploring all these different modalities and then working with clients. So eventually in 2021 is when I got to the point where I was like, I just can't do this work anymore. That's very unaligned. I see a very different possibility with how people can change through different modalities. And I need the freedom to do that. And so that's when I left in 2021 to work for myself. And so I've had my own coaching business since, basically facilitating folks through transformation with holistic and energy psychology, as well as now kind of my intuitive abilities.
Oh, I love it. And there's so many crossovers between you and me. I mean, I have every certification really? As well. Yes, I totally did that. And I had a kind of a similar, I've been on the spiritual path for a long time, but I feel like the universe was like, I don't think you're fully understanding. So here's a dark night of the soul kind of thing, here's, we're just going to pepper.
Or 30 more. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I did the thing too of, I went to art school when I was 30. That was my 30th birthday present to myself. I'd always wanted to do it. And then I pursued my master's in art. And I thought same as you. Great. I found my identity. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And we're all set. And I did my PhD in art. I was recruited to do my PhD. I did a postdoc and I had one of the most traumatic experiences I could possibly imagine through the postdoc. It was a horribly abusive environment, not just for me, but for everybody who was involved with it. And I remember distinctly walking, I was in Glasgow, Scotland at the time, and I was walking on this super rainy, the kind of rain where it's just it's insulting, right? It's salt on the wound, just an aggressive rain. And I my clothes were soaked and they were getting so heavy, they were falling off. And I was just what am I doing with my life? This isn't what I want to do. And I had a sense of grief but I thought that this was the thing.
Yes.
Because I had attached to that identity. And I was sort of forced to let that go. And ironically, that's when my dog came into my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a little trip. Listeners to the podcast will know this. I'll keep it kind of short, but I went to see my mom and some other friends who were in Mexico at the time, and I thought I just need to have my chakras unblocked, or I need some sort of energy work done. And I went to see a local curandero, and he's like, "Remind me why you're here." I was like, "Oh, it's just my chakras. They just need a blocking. We'll
Yeah.
be good." We'll do it. Exactly, exactly. And he just laughed at me. And he was like, "You don't need your chakras unblocking." He's like, "You're a bruja, a witch, an energy worker. You need to
Mhm.
learn to work with your energy better. That's why all of this has happened." He's like, "And it will just keep falling apart until you pay attention to how to work with
Oh,
energy."
love.
Love it, right? And then he
Yes.
said, this was where the kicker came in. And he said, "By the way, pay attention to dogs and cats that cross your path, particularly at this time. They're healers for you." And literally days later, there was a knock at the door. "Can you take this puppy?" It was like, you can't make this stuff up. You
Of
just can't make it
course.
up, right?
Wow.
But
Yeah.
when he told me that they were my healers, and later in like throughout our conversation, he was like, "They're teachers for you too." I had this idea that like healing was going to make me feel great, and him being my teacher was going to be such an
Yeah.
easy, wonderful kind of thing.
Oh, wishful thinking. Yeah.
Total wishful thinking. And it was anything but. Like, he presented with health challenges. He was a pandemic pup. It was like one thing after
Oh,
the
wow.
other.
Yeah.
But what it kind of got me to do, and this is where I'd love your thoughts on this. Like, it really made me start to look at, what are we meaning when we're talking about healing? What is it
Mm.
that's actually going on, and what we're seeking from the healing process?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a lot of unlearning, right? Because we've all been taught that the symptoms are bad and we need to suppress them or get rid of them of all at all costs, right? And so now there's certainly more awareness around, okay, well, what is root cause? What is the root cause? And so certainly like functional medicine, naturopaths or whatnot, there's the look of like, is there metabolic issues, inflammation, whatever. And to me, I'm kind of like, what's below that? You know what I mean? It always starts as energy first. Like everything is a held vibration first, and then it manifests into matter. And so this is where along this journey, and especially with Bucky's journey and him going through lifelong issues of autoimmune conditions, where I was continually seeking, is where I stumbled across German New Medicine or German healing knowledge. And that's probably the modality that I resonated with the most. Not trained in it, I just have kind of a general understanding. But the idea is that symptoms are actually the healing phase or the recovery phase. So the idea here is that there's all these different biological laws that they have defined in the modality, but basically we go through psychic conflicts, so some sort of mental conflict we're struggling with, like an abandonment issue, something like that. And the body adapts at the cellular level to manage the heightened stress, the heightened adrenaline, right? All these things. So the body adapts in order to get us through this mental stress. Once the mental stress is over, the body recovers and the body has symptoms. And I was like, oh my gosh, how many times have I gotten sick after being stressed? Like I was just, and thinking like, well, I had the cold or I had the flu or whatever. And I was like, this makes total sense. And it was just game changing, because to me, then the body is just constantly speaking to us through symptoms, right? Through energy. And to me, if I see the symptoms as like a healing phase, then this is information for me. I no longer have to be scared. I'm empowered, I'm informed, and I can listen to that and learn how to work more harmoniously with my body.
Oh, thank you for saying that, because I think that's something we need to keep hearing as well, in terms of it being information, because we talk about too, I mean, I'm specifically talking from the kind of canine side of things, but I think it's
Yeah.
applicable to the human side of things too. And especially because being mammals, we have a lot of the same issues, particularly with like how we store trauma, how we process things. But you also pointed out that, and I'd love for you to talk about this, about how we can actually learn from animals about how to process stress a little bit better. But when we see that our dogs have a health issue, the first thing we tend to do is, how do I get rid of that symptom? And in
Yeah.
reality, sometimes, like I was talking to a holistic vet, Dr. Odette Suter, who said, when I'm seeing dogs that have chronic diarrhea, for example, yes, we want to support the body in being more hydrated and remove, like you're saying, the root cause of what is triggering that diarrhea. But we also have to look at diarrhea as, that's the body's natural way of clearing what is a
Mm-hmm.
problem. So you don't actually, in stopping it, you're stopping the detoxing process. And how many times do we do that sort of thing in an attempt to kind of get rid of the symptom? And I think it's such an invitation, what you're saying, to kind of look at actually, what is this telling me at a physical level, but also what is this telling me at a deeper level that's going on?
Yeah, 100%. And I sense that it's no coincidence that, Bucky came to me at the time. He came to me like right when I was starting graduate school for psychology. And it was not but 2 years in that he, developed this kind of crazy autoimmune condition where he basically was not having enough white blood cells, I believe. And so he would be in danger of bleeding out internally. And I tried all the things to try to fix it, so to speak. And it was almost like the universe was like, you have to surrender to this, just let it go. And I had to get to the point of being able to manage it to some degree. Now, I never thought he would make it. I mean, he's 15 now. So see, never thought he'd make it this long, but here we are, just from being able to start to learn to see how he reflects back to me. And of course we can get into that if that is relevant, but it's certainly kind of what I talked about in my podcast, where as I started to transform how I was seeing health, then it was the same thing for him. When he's having symptoms, I wasn't going into freak out mode of, oh my God, I need to fix this or whatnot. It's just kind of like, okay, what do you need? What energy is your body processing right now? And I just ask him a lot of questions. Do we need to go to the vet? Yes or no? I'm just energetically kind of tapping into what feels light rather than, jumping immediately to conclusion. The hard part with that is A, all our past programming, and B, when we start to get dysregulated, it's hard to tune into intuitively what we're hearing or our connection to them. And so that's usually when I'll recruit my energy friends, because I'm like, I'm just dysregulated. Please talk to him.
Yeah.
To get clear awareness.
Yeah, no, I heard you speak about what feels light in terms of that being my truth, and again, personalizing it, like what's true for me, what's true for my dog, and also what feels heavy and therefore isn't right for you. And that's so akin to what I do with like muscle testing, for example, with Lucky and with client dogs too, like what feels good. But it's such a great gateway to start to check in with yourself. And a big part of what I feel like your work speaks to is that we actually own what's right for us. We own what's true for us. And I wonder if you could talk, maybe this is a good time to kind of talk about the specifics of the story with Bucky and how that was a catalyst for you reconnecting with your truth and actually speaking that out.
Yeah. So it was like about a year and a half ago now that I was going through another transformation, another dark night of the soul, another awareness. And I had my own physical symptoms. And that kind of went through some very intense neck pain for like 6 weeks. And I just kind of recovered from that. And, something new was coming online. I had just started a new mocktail business, was just diving into that. Right. So new things were blooming. And we're about to dig a pool in our backyard. So like lots was happening. So I was almost not as present, if you will, until Bucky had some pretty intense symptoms and kind of shaky and just more off than usual. I mean, certainly I kind of know his regular symptoms and what we've managed, but this seemed a little bit more dramatic. Well, I go to my current vet who, I've done all the holistic things already, and I'm just kind of more working with a vet that's ease, and I can listen to my own internal knowing and then just go from there. And that day I got a little dysregulated with it because it went pretty fast from, okay, I'm feeling maybe there's a growth on the back. Let's do some x-rays. We got to figure out what's going on. He's 14. He's had these issues forever, la, la, la. So I tune in. Okay. Is it light to gather more information? Yep. Okay. Let's do this. Already have the awareness of, I just want to keep him comfortable. I don't need to go into all this, but a little more data would be helpful here. Like, is it light to get more data? Yes. Okay, let's go. And again, this idea of light and heavy, where it's not right or wrong. It's just every scenario is different. And I'm tuning into what is the energy communicating to me? What do I need to know, right? For someone else, it might not have been, but for my growth and healing, I needed more data. So we go through that experience, and the vet immediately jumps to some pretty extreme conclusions that I can't remember exactly what it was now, but like, he had diagnosed it as some super rare, very aggressive cancer. And basically we were going to lose him in 2 weeks. This was his point of view. And he's like, well, we can do more testing and do all this stuff. And I was like, okay, I just need some time and space with my dog to figure this out. So we kind of remove myself. I take the day off and I literally just sit outside all day with my dog and just kind of tune in energetically what's going on. And I'm like, I think I just need some space and I need to talk to my energy friends and have them recruit, right? So bring them in to connect long distance with him. And they started to reflect back to me what was going on. And so what was seen in the x-ray as a growth on his spine, my friend was saying, he's like, you just went through a massive transformation that you're not acknowledging. And he's like, energetically, you need to acknowledge it, or like this is going to continue to contract around you. He's like, growth is here. Growth is here. It's undeniable. It's happened. So it's kind of like what was happening for Bucky was reflecting energetically what's happening to me, but I wasn't acknowledging. And to me, it's like the minute we put our conscious attention to energy, it shifts, right? The molecule shifts. And so energy needs to be acknowledged to shift. And so it was calling for that, but I was just kind of so distracted with so many other doing, as my generator self, lots of action, that I was not paying attention to that. And so once that happened, wow, I would say within 24 hours, there's a dramatic change in Bucky. And I was like, we're not doing any more testing. We're just going to keep him comfortable. Cause same thing, I communicated with my friends. I was like, is he wanting to be out? And they're like, no, I think he's good. He just wanted to reflect something intense to you. And I was like, I don't know. I don't trust you, but here we are a year and a half later, he's thriving still. So, I just, I trust now in the wisdom of the body that I think we haven't even scratched the surface of, and just how amazing it can be when we start to see things differently.
Oh, 100%. Thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful. I'm so glad that he's doing well. That's amazing. That's so amazing. But your story is so relatable because I think so often that's part of why we often get afraid to go to the vets is that we're going to get told the worst case scenario. And I think it points to, and I've heard you talk about this on previous podcasts as well, that and I agree with you on this, that when we put our energy on something, our attention on something, we're giving that power. Doesn't matter what it is. So we actually can expand it by focusing on it. And this isn't woo. This is like double slit experiment, like we know
there's science behind it. Okay, you guys.
Exactly. And so I love the quote. I think I first heard it from Carolyn Mace or through Carolyn Mace, where she talked about how faith and fear or faith and worry are basically the same thing. It's putting belief in something unseen, and you get to choose where you put that. And I think that's such a healthy and helpful reminder of where our agency actually lies. And it is at that, like you're saying, it all starts with the energetics.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really glad you brought that up because that was something that had popped for me recently too. And it's kind of like, what are you practicing? What are you focusing on? And that's something that I work with my clients a lot on because they don't even realize where they're putting their attention and how much momentum it's garnering. And then all of a sudden they're dysregulated. And I'll have clients come to me and be like, I'm doing the breath work, I'm doing the tapping, but it just doesn't seem to be helping. And I was like, well, consider that if you are focused on something like fear constantly, like you are looping a fearful belief pattern over and over all day long, you can do all the breath work you want and it's not going to get you the healing you desire, right? Because it's like you regulate, dysregulate, regulate, dysregulate. And it's just like you need more periods of regulation so that your body can heal and recover because the body only heals in a relaxed state. And we're just in a society, a culture that has us constantly at a dysregulated state, even if it's like light fight or flight, but we're just constantly there. We're so used to it. We don't even know what relaxation feels like, or we're kind of like phobic to it. It's like, we don't want to relax too. Like, I'm on edge, I got to constantly be doing something.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of similar to when we're in conversation with people. And if there's like a bit of a silence, a little bit of a pause in the group, it brings up panic. Like people are genuinely like, oh my God, I need to fill it with something, And I think because we haven't been taught, I think this is, I'm not going to say it's solely a Western thing, but I'm going to comment from the Western perspective of we haven't been taught how to deal with our emotions. We've been taught that our value comes from being busy. Our worth is from what we achieve and all that. So that's part of what keeps us constantly going. But something that I think from that kind of collective level, we were talking before we started recording about just sort of what's in the air, right? And the kind of heaviness in the air and how we deal with a lot of that. This is something that I think that our dogs are here to help us learn,
Mm, mhm, mhm.
because not only do they take our stuff on, they hold our energy. And I mean, even again, this isn't even woo, like they smell the cortisol in our sweat and our adrenaline. Like we smell
Yeah.
differently when we're stressed, right? And then they're like, oh my God, what do I have to be stressed about? And then you have reactivity and you have trauma and all these other behavioral things in your dog that you're then trying to give all the herbs or work with the trainer or whatever
Oh,
to try to
wow.
sort, when in reality, source is sitting right here with it, right? Like
Always back to me. Here we go.
always,
Yeah.
always, right? And I think, when I talk about dogs being a sacred mirror, I never mean it in a judgmental kind of thing, like a finger pointing kind of thing. And
Hmm.
but what a mirror does is it allows us to have a different perspective. We
Yep.
get to see something differently. And so there's an invitation in that. It's not you
Yeah.
caused your dog to have this, right? You didn't cause this, but there's a relationship. And if you choose to look at it, there's
Yeah.
a lot of wisdom in that.
Oh, 100%. And it's like the building of awareness. So yeah, never seen it as a judgment thing, like, oh, you're wrong or this is bad. It's just like, what am I learning from this? Truly. It's interesting because right now that we're recording this, the election happened yesterday, right? And so it's funny because last night, even though I was seeking to be regulated, doing other things, keeping busy, keeping kind of mind off it, funny enough, Bucky was pretty anxious last night, like didn't sleep very well, was kind of up and off the bed. And I was like, oh my God, I got to work out tomorrow and I got to get calls tomorrow. You know what I mean? Thinking all
Yeah.
that. And I'm like, because he's been sleeping pretty fine through the night lately. So I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? The collective energies are just so intense right now that he is kind of mirroring, albeit probably myself as well, but just kind of everything that's happening and how unsettled people were truly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard you speak before about helping people become aware of the fact that they are sensitive to energies, because I think so
Mm,
often we personalize it and it becomes like, well, what's wrong with
yeah.
me? Why am I so anxious? What is this from? And sometimes it is our own, but a lot of times it's not, or it's compounded by other things. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you see that in practice and maybe some ways that people can start to kind of discern what is theirs and what isn't theirs.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Okay, well, I would imagine likely your folks, if they're attracted to your work, then they're naturally already energetically sensitive. So it is first just acknowledging that you have these capabilities. And I tell my clients, it's like imagine yourself like a radio receiver. So you are constantly emitting energy and you are receiving energy, and energy knows no bounds, no bounds. So anytime that you experience some sort of sensation, whether it's like an emotion, a thought form, whatever, you can simply ask yourself, well, who does this belong to? What am I aware of here? Now, I ask the question simply to give some space to the energy, because what were we taught but to personalize it? This is my feeling. I feel anxious or I feel mad, right? And although it was very helpful at the time to help us build awareness into like, what are we experiencing? Now we need to grow a bit further and create some distance so that we don't personalize all energies. Because if we are this radio receiver, then we're picking up tons of information at any given moment. And we just don't need to process it all. We simply don't. We can be aware, but we don't need to absorb it all. It's way too much for the physical body. So the simple act of taking the moment to pause and ask the question immediately presupposes this energy might not be mine, right? Versus the affirmation of I am anxious. And it's like, yep, I'm taking on, give me more, and I'll take some of yours and some of yours. And right. Versus I'm like, about that. What is that? Right. I don't need to know the answer because hello, 8 billion people on the planet. Who the heck knows? But just the act of being mindful, setting some space, then oftentimes much energy diffuses. And so we can just simply start there with who does this belong to? What am I aware of? Diffuse quite a few layers of energy. And then I can kind of pick apart, okay, what lie am I into here? What limiting belief maybe is going on here? I can start to kind of really work on my stuff versus everything else I'm aware of.
Yeah. That's so helpful. And actually, it's really similar. I'm not a dog trainer or a behaviorist, but I have a reactive dog. And so
Mm,
I'm I'm having to practice a lot of these things and looking at like how, for example, like when am I afraid on the walk and how am I translating that fear to Lucky, for example. But what you were just describing is like we're so quick to do it with our dogs of recognize, okay, they're overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed by the situation. We got to get them out. And then we can start working with them on the training or whatever, how we want them to see things differently or what have you. But we don't show ourselves that same grace. We really don't. It's like we think we should be on top of it and we should just like plow through this or like do all the self-help work of like, I'm owning all my emotions. But like you said, like that might not even be her emotion to own. Like that's putting a burden on that you can't possibly deal with. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's kind of like, I appreciate the notion of feel your feelings, right? We're trying to get people to not suppress and become conscious and aware, right? So I get that. And there is a point where we have to be mindful of, like you said, it's like, is this feeling even mine? Or like, am I processing other people's things? Because that might not be necessary. And if I start to lean in and tell myself a story about why I think I feel the way I do, well, now I solidify it in place. And so that's where we really have to be cautious, because if we start to go to a bunch of conclusions, stories about why I think I feel the way I do, which who knows, who has decided, like you decide, like, this is my feeling. It's like, well, could it be someone else's just, and so that way, just creating the space can just, like you said, it's kind of like removing your dog from the experience. It's like you remove yourself from the experience so you can have a little more clarity. It's like, take the time to do that. No one is expecting you to like have the answers all the time right away. You know?
Totally. And I think too, because we're talking about advocacy as well here, that these are parts of the steps for us to start to become an advocate. Like if you've never been an advocate in your life, it doesn't start with you just going into the vet's office and being like, this is, or, standing up for something. You start with these small things. And it really, in my opinion, it begins with just that level of awareness of myself, right? Like, and then you can start to build and practice as you kind of move forward with those things. But I'm wondering too, as you were talking about, like, so if we can create that space, do that bit of questioning, if we find that it actually is our thing, what are some things that you maybe suggest people kind of start with to deal with that and move that energy through?
Yeah, great question. So usually it's more open-ended questions to kind of explore what's coming up and build some awareness to what state am I currently residing in, because that will really determine then what tools I'm going to utilize. So if I'm finding myself really dysregulated, like very, very anxious, very irritable, then I probably need a big tool, some sort of either cold exposure, intense exercise, maybe big breath work, just to kind of move the energy. Because when we're really dysregulated, then trying to think our way out of it isn't really helpful. There's just too much momentum. So it's like, forget using the mind, just go move your body, use the physical vessel. So, but if it's something a little bit where I'm kind of at my computer, I'm working on a work project or something, and I just kind of paralyze, I get frozen, right? I'm not maybe as overtly dysregulated, but I can still access my mental faculties. Then I'm going to ask some more questions around judgment, usually, because this tends to be another key thing that dysregulates people, is they go into a lot of wrongness of themselves or fear about trying to get an answer right. So it's kind of like, okay, what am I aware of here? If I couldn't get my choice wrong, what would I choose? And I would just start to ask myself questions again, I'm trying to create more space for energy to get moving again. So this is kind of specifically how I work with my clients in facilitating them so that they know how to facilitate themselves when they are in these different states, because it's really going to be kind of state dependent on how you would proceed.
Oh, that's super helpful. I also love too that you do a lot of like dancing work too, of like really shake, because I'm a big fan of shaking and looking at like how our dogs show us this too. It's amazing with just a little bit, just a couple of minutes of like vigorously shaking the body, what that can do. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that came out, I think, originally for me when I was studying Dr. Peter Levine's work and, kind of regarding trauma and how animals recover from trauma. And it's they either labor their breathing or they tremor their bodies. And I was like, well, like you said, we're mammals. It's kind of the same idea. So breath work. And to me, it was dance parties. And I used to teach my veterans go have a dance party. Just, don't go look at the trauma, come home from work and have a dance party, put on some music, do it with your kids. Like, this is a great way to just get energy out of the body. And it's funny how many people were resistant even to that. And I think it's just kind of like, the body goes into some protection. It wants to be familiar in the heightened state of stress. And so letting it out feels weird, looks weird, all these sorts of things. But once people could get used to that, I was like, this is just such a great, easy, simple way to release and regulate. You don't have to think about it. Just move how your body is called, right? I know there's a lot of specific somatic exercises, and I get that it doesn't have to be so complicated. You can really just listen to yourself and move in a way that you feel called to.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I wondered if like, what is your perspective then on how, if we're thinking of like emotions as energy in motion and we're trapping things in the body, and I think that's a big part of where we start to have aches and pains, or where we're feeling physical symptoms of like PTSD or what have you, that kind of a thing, and where movement can help move it, can help shift it. What is going on at the cellular level? Because I know you talk about this in your work as well. Like, how are we holding on to emotions at the cellular level? And what are some ways that we can start to kind of release that? I think that's helpful for people to start to understand that, because the same thing is happening for our dogs.
Yeah, 100%. Well, for us, I get that, we tell ourselves a story about kind of why we feel the way we do. And so that locks it in at the cellular level. And so that kind of contracts us, versus I like to see it just as weather. Like, what needs to come through is a weather system. So the same way a storm comes through very powerfully, especially here in Texas. Oh my God, the storms are crazy. They come through and then it's sunny an hour later. And so it's kind of like this idea where the storm can come in, be very powerful, and then things are refreshed, renewed, cleansed. But you don't have a point of view about it. It's just like, yeah, a storm came through. I mean, maybe it's not ideal because I wanted to go for a walk, but a storm came through, it's no big deal. And now I'll just go later. Versus if people go into like, why am I angry? Why am I crying? And this is bad. And I shouldn't be crying. And I'm weak for having these emotions. Going into all that really locks it into place. And so that's the issue. And I sense when people can relate to the energy differently, like you said, it's just energy in motion. Like, if I have anger, what if I just growled like a dog? What if I just growled? It's the same way they release it. And it is so, and I encourage people to try that, because I'm like, just growl and notice how you release that sensation. And it's funny because I get dogs are like the storm. The leader of the pack is calm, cool, and collected. But when a storm comes in, about it, but it's quick and it's over. Like, he's back to being regulated, right? It's a growl and a snap, like put you in line and then back to regulated. The leader of the pack is not the chaotic, dysregulated dog that's like yapping all the time. That's not the leader of the pack. Right? And so that's how I tell people to think about it, honestly, because it's kind of like you are allowed to have these weather patterns. Of course, we don't want to like have mass destruction on other people. We want to be mindful about how we are expressing them and whatnot, but you can't suppress the weather. It's going to come. Like, the volcano's going to erupt eventually. So I sense when people can relate to it different, where it's like, oh, okay, I just need to weather. Like, then it's not like, oh, I'm crying because I'm weak, or I'm a boy because no, it's none of that. It's just like, I just needed to weather. And then it's over much faster. If anyone follows Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, he talks about this a lot. I mean, the actual sensation of emotion is about 90 seconds. What keeps it into place is what we tell ourselves about it. So when we can start to separate that and create a different relationship, you can express your emotions much more easily.
Oh, I love that. That's super helpful. And what, like a sharp reminder too, that in actuality, it only lasts 90 seconds, but we're the ones that put ourselves in a kind of suffering state in many respects by repeating it. Yeah, no, exactly. But it was interesting as you were saying that. I was reflecting on one of the modalities that I have worked with dogs, though. It's called Canine Flow, that was set up by a friend and mentor of mine, that looks at how dogs naturally want to flow energy, and that they are constantly seeking opportunities to ground their energy in different ways. So whether that's from play, and you'll see how they'll alternate roles between like who's the kind of prey and who's the predator in the chasing kind of thing or whatever, and how in the current situation that we've got them in, which they're basically captives, right? And we've taken them out of their natural environments and we limit the natural activities that we allow them to do, like don't dig in my garden, or don't, that kind of, or, you've got like a border collie living in an apartment and not actually getting to exhibit the behaviors which keep them in a more neutral state, right? They get stressed when they don't have an outlet for the behaviors that we bred them to do, right? They no longer have a job, as many behaviors we'll talk about. We've bred them to do a particular job, and we take that opportunity away from them. And so then we're seeing a lot of the dysregulation in dogs that is mirroring our own, because both of us are living in contexts that don't actually suit who we are, which is super, super interesting. But one of the things in canine flow that we talk about is supporting your dog to kind of complete circuits, energetic circuits. So dogs like to ground things with their mouths. So that's why you'll see them like biting things, or like they like to do tug. Oh, there's a lot of mouth work that goes on. So they're getting rid of their excess energy through there. So if you've got a dog that is all amped up after something, they've been trigger stacked. And again, we get trigger stacked. So all of these things are kind of parallel to what we're doing with ourselves, but we can first focus on how we help support the dogs to look at what is my version of this. But one of the things you can do, so if you've been out on the walk and your reactive dog has been triggered, you get them home and they're all anxious. And they're like, they've not processed it. And so one of the things that you can be doing is giving them outlets to then release it on you. So for example, like holding your hand at their chest and allowing them to press into it and taking that charge, or the same thing with doing stuff at the mouth. You can give them things to like bite on something, or to do like the touch cue, that kind of a thing, where they have to physically put their nose or their mouth to your hand, as a way of teaching them to self-regulate, which I think is like amazing and kind of crazy that we've put them in situations where we have to do that for them. But what you were just describing, it makes me think of those needs that we also have of kind of, it clicked for me in terms of thinking about completing that circuit. It's got to go somewhere. And if we don't give it an appropriate outlet, that's when we start to feel like, oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if people are particularly energetically sensitive, you've been diagnosed with ADHD, autism, some sort of neurodivergence, then to me, that's all labels for your radio receiver is more attuned than most. And so you are tuning into energies more than most, which means you need more regulation. You need more ways to close the circuit. And so for me, that's like EFT tapping is really great. Tapping on acupressure points, similar to acupuncture, breath work, or just even some way of stemming with repetitive movements. For me, like I rub my feet on like a blanket, just I don't even recognize I'm doing it. I just all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm like, right, I'm regulating myself, I'm grounding myself with touch in some sort of way. And so I think just normalizing that, especially the fact that, we do it for our animals, it's the same thing. We need it as well.
Exactly. And the thing is with our animals too, they hold on to the stuff if we're not giving them those outlets, in the same way that I know that you mentioned that you did the emotion code and the body code stuff.
Yeah.
I ended up in a situation with Lucky where I was at a homeopath for humans in Mexico, and I needed something for, my vet had said, yeah, maybe silica would be helpful for his anal glands. And she's like, you can go to the homeopath and ask for it. And so then in Spanish, I'm like, how on earth am I going to explain that I'm looking for silica for my dog's anal?
Yeah.
It was so
like,
funny.
What hand movement can I do?
It was so awkward. But what was really interesting was he said, well, before I give it to you, he did his due diligence. He's like, can you talk to me about what's actually going on? And then he said, would you be willing to sit on the table and be a proxy for your dog? And I was like, sure. And so I didn't know what he was doing at the time, but he took my heels. He had me sat, it was like a normal kind of doctor's table with my heels hanging off the end, and he was balancing them. And then I heard him muttering, and of course this is in Spanish, and I was like, oh, I heard line 1, line 2, and line 2. Oh, column A, column B. And I knew exactly what he was talking about with the emotion code. And he was talking to me about how at the end of it, he was like, actually, your dog doesn't have these issues. What I'm picking up on is that it's not so much that he has kidney disease. He's got stuff trapped in his kidneys. Was he abandoned? Did he have these issues? And by the way, how are your fear levels? It's like, well, they're very high right now. They are very
like I wasn't ready for a therapy session, so I don't know what to tell you.
Exactly. But he gave me stuff to help support him with that. But he was also talking to me about like, how can you change the way you're being with him to help him move all of this stuff? And by doing it with him, it's moving it for you too.
Wow.
You know, it's and that kind of relationship, which reminds me very much of your relationship with Bucky, and that kind of that literal mirroring of what's going on, like from an emotional to a physical level, and how dogs are just amazing gifts for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that lately because when I notice I'm just kind of like in work mode, especially these days, just creating a lot of different things and whatnot. At some points, Bucky will be kind of pacing around, whining like, hello, can we be present for a moment? Let's just play for a minute. I mean, he's always that cue to remind me to take a break. Let's take a walk, and like that we don't need to be kind of this productive generation machine constantly. And to be present just on the simple level. And I think that's just such a gift, truly, especially because I don't have children. And so it's kind of my reminder to check back in and get present.
Yeah. And a specific kind of presence too. Like it's not enough that you're sitting next to them and you're on your phone, you know, like they're like,
Right.
that doesn't count. Like you may be here, but you're not present with me.
Oh, no. Oh my God. No, exactly. It'll be on a day when, okay, so normally he's very much like, okay, I need to eat at this time and I'm going to let you know, la, la, la. And if I'm on my phone or my computer, he will let me know. However, if I am busy cleaning the house, doing something, doing laundry, he will leave me alone. He'll leave me alone. So if I'm actively like doing that, like in the house, being present, doing things versus if I'm on my computer or on my phone, nope, you need to take care of me now. So it's just so funny how, I mean, just even those subtle differences show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like they're picking up on the sense that you're like mindfully doing one thing and not necessarily doing the other. Yeah. Oh, I love it. I
don't need you posting on social media. You need to feed me now.
Always. Always.
Yeah.
Oh, Janine, this has been such a gift. Thank you so much for just sharing your time, your energy, and your wisdom with people. I think there's going to be a lot of really great nuggets for people to take away about how they can kind of consider themselves, consider how to regulate themselves, and in doing so, start to feel in that empowered place of becoming their own advocate and their dog's health advocate. Such a gift. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. And
Thank you.
Truly, I think, I mean, if we start to see them different and seeing, like you said, seeing them as little mirrors and them are just constantly communicating in a way, then it just opens up a whole new world of awareness for folks that can really just be a gift for their own healing as well.
Totally. And I want to point people to your work. Where are some good places for them to learn about how to work with you? And I know you have your daily course as well that's really accessible for people. What are some places they can find out more about you?
Yeah. So so people can find me on Kreft's Couch, mostly on Instagram and TikTok these days. And then Daily is, I have a couple courses on there if they just search me by name. But those are really accessible prices. So like low price points for people to kind of get a taste of my work and whatnot. If you're ready to go all in, I have some one-on-one options also available. And if anyone happens to be on a sober curious journey or a mocktail journey, that's my new business is House of Botanique. We created a non-alcoholic botanical infusion. And so that's just a whole other story for another time, but I'm really excited to be launching that. We're on Amazon now for that. So it's another passion project of mine. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And is information for that on your website as well? That if people
on
are
my,
curious?
on Kreft's Couch on Instagram and TikTok on social media, you'll find it there too.
Perfect. And I will leave all of those links in the show notes. Janine, thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much for having me. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining me for my conversation with Dr. Janine Kreft. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to hear what your takeaways were. Send me a message on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, leave a comment, or get in touch with me on my website, mysticdogmama.com, and let me know. To learn more about Janine's work and to connect with her, visit her website, creftscouch.com, as well as her Instagram, Kreft's Couch. I've left these links in the show notes. Janine's work points to the benefits of taking a holistic approach to our own mental, physical, and emotional health. And this translates to what I've found really works well for our dog's health too. If this holistic approach to caring for your dog resonates with you, and you're interested in becoming a part of a new community dedicated to helping you become your dog's health advocate, Stacy Renfrey of Hozo Hounds and I are launching our Fetch membership, which is designed to teach you the same holistic framework that we use in our canine nutrition and well-being practices, so that you too can confidently take control of your dog's health journey. Comment Fetch or DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, or send me a message on my website, mysticdogmama.com, for more information. Finally, if you're enjoying the podcast, I would be so grateful if you would consider liking, following, subscribing, and leaving a comment or review. Not only does it mean the world to me to connect with you and hear what you're enjoying, it also helps the algorithm to put the podcast in front of more people so that we can continue helping other pet parents who are looking for some support and growing this beautiful community. Okay, until next time.